Aloha! Aloha! How are you guys doing tonight? Good. Good. I'm seeing some new faces tonight. So welcome everybody. My name is Erin. I'm the education manager here at Maui Ocean Center, and we're thrilled to have so many of you guys coming out to see Peter Bennett and listen about his work and the work he's done with his wife Ursula. So I'm going to make this brief because I know his stories are fascinating and can't wait to hear. So just a little bit first about Peter. He has recently retired from a career of more than 40 years in IT, or information technology. Yeah? Yep. All right, that's a field I stay away from. Mostly as a documentation specialist. In 1987, he and his wife Ursula have spent July and August here, and they're from Canada, so of course it's probably a welcome relief. So July and August here, diving in Honokowai, they have together done 2,500 dives, and so you bet they probably have some really cool stories. They have documented their life on the reef, they documented the turtles, their life on the reef, the struggle with the tumor disease fibropapilloma, and together they've created the first website devoted to sea turtles, which you guys might be familiar with. It's called it's turtles.org, but it's called Turtle Tracks. And they actually wrote this book, which is a fantastic book. How many of you guys are familiar with this? Yes. Awesome. If you're not, take some time out tonight and check it out. And we've actually got a bunch in here if you guys are interested in purchasing these. They spent quite a lot of time earlier today autographing them, and you really should check out their autographs. They're all unique, one-of-a-kind pieces of art from Ursula herself. And they will be available after the talk right over here. Tapani is in the dark shadows. And we've decided to make it a quick and easy $17, so it's a little bit of a discount from the normal rate. So if you're interested in those will be available over here. And if nothing else, just check it out and have a look. So without further ado, let's welcome Peter.
Oh, thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Well, can everybody hear me? Yeah. Is this thing on? Mahalo, Erin, and mahalo to the Maui Ocean Center for asking me to speak to you tonight. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. My name, as Erin explained to you, is Peter Bennett. I'm a retired technical writer from Mississauga. This is a suburb of Toronto. And my wife and co-author, Ursula Cooper Bennett, is a retired teacher, and she suggested tonight's title, Honu, Charismatic Megafauna. Now, I suspect you all know what Honu are, but Charismatic Megafauna might not be quite as familiar. The term Charismatic Megafauna was invented somewhere around 1985, and it's, according to Wikipedia, they are large animal species, any large animal species with widespread popular appeal that environmental activists use to achieve environmentalist goals. So it's not always seen as a positive. The World Wildlife Fund, as you probably know, uses the panda bear as its symbol. And other common examples would be something like the lion, elephants, seal pups, and probably everybody from Maui or who has visited Maui is familiar with this one, the humpback whale. A few years ago, the dominant characteristic megafauna for Maui would have been the humpback. But today that position is occupied by Honu. And indeed, that's true now for all of the islands. And that's because the Honu are here all year round. They're more accessible. They can't easily approach a humpback whale. And the growth of the population has resulted in ever-increasing numbers of Honu-human interactions. So educating people about how to behave around Honu is one reason why my wife and I wrote the Book of Honu. Now you might ask yourself, how did two Canadians who aren't marine biologists wind up writing what is still the only non-children's book entirely devoted to the Honu? Well, we do have credentials, as Erin mentioned, If you add up the hours, we spend a total of about more than 100 24-hour days underwater with the Honu. We've taken 8,000 to 10,000 pictures and made over 750 hours of video. And again, as she mentioned, we created the first marine turtle website in the World Wide Web in 1995. And we did that mainly to draw attention to the tumor disease, fibropapillomatosis, or FP, because beginning in the mid-80s or so, FP looked like an extinction threat to the green turtles, and not just in Hawaii, but worldwide. So when we started seeing tumors on the Honokowai turtles, we started to document them. And as a result, in 1997, we presented the first evidence of FP regression to the International Sea Turtle Symposium, with the title, a mouthful, Photographic Evidence for the Regression of Fibropapillomas Afflicting Green Turtles, C. mitis, at Honokowai, Maui, and the Hawaiian Islands. So in 2001, we improved our graphic skills a little bit and presented this paper, The Eyes Have It, Manifestation of Ocular Tumors in the Green Turtle Ohana of Honokowai, West Maui, Hawaii. And this paper showed that you could understand FP in the Honu by examining their eyes. FP first started to show up in the eyes, so that would be where you saw the first signs. And then when it started to regress, that would also be the first place that you would see regression begin. But the real reason that we wrote the Book of Honu is this delightful Honu, Cloth-a-Hump. Ursula's been coming to Maui every summer since 1977. I've been coming since 1987. We've always stayed at the Nani in Honokowai. And diving there in 1988, we met this small juvenile turtle. Actually, this video is from 1990. And I'm showing it to you to show how precocious and cute she was and why we actually gave our hearts over to the Honu. She was the first one that we ever met. We really never determined what her sex actually was, but we always thought of her as a female. She was always out there, and if she wasn't there when we started our dive, if we waited, she would always show up. We named her Cloth-a-Hump because we didn't know any turtle names. Cloth-a-Hump is a turtle wizard from the Spellsinger fantasy series. And we had some video and a few pictures, but when we went to produce our book, we decided that it would be better if Ursula used her artistic talents and produce this wonderful sketch that occupies one of the first pages in our book. Now, the Book of Honu is the result of a promise we made to tell the story of Cloth-a-Hump and the Honu of Honokowai. And we made this promise because Cloth-a-Hump got FP. Now, last year, any of you who were here to hear my talk know that it was largely about FP and how it drove us. This year, I wanted to make it a bit more about the Honu, a lot more about the Honu, but a summary of FP is mandatory, so bear with me for a moment. What are fibropapilloma tumors? Well, in humans, papilloma tumors are benign growths spread by a virus, for example, warts. Papilloma tumors that develop predominant fibrous tissue are called fibropapillomas. In turtles, the tumors grow primarily on the skin, but they can also appear between the scales and the scutes and on the eyes and on internal organs. And for some reason that no one has ever understood, in Hawaii only, the tumors can also grow in the mouth. Now, it's a popular misconception that these tumors are cancerous, but the fact is they are not. They're not cancerous. Cloth-a-Hump was not the only turtle with FP at Honokowai. In fact, virtually all the residents of Honokowai who stayed more than 3 years got FP, in the early years at least. And that was the focus of most of our Honu experiences for the first 15 years or so. Now, today, the epidemic has passed at Honokowai because for Honu that are large enough, tumors actually regress. Now, as an example, I'll introduce you to Tiamat. We met Tiamat in 1992, and Tiamat turned out to be a female and nested for the first time in 1998 and acquired the tags 122C. In 1994, Tiamat developed FP. She had tumors on her eyes, her mouth, her neck, and around the flippers. And we diagnosed her as moderately afflicted, and we feared for her health. We thought it was probably going to get worse. But by 1996, as you can see, these areas where we were seeing tumors, all the tumors had regressed. They vanished. So Tiamat in 2011 has no trace of her FP. And she's typical of the Honu of Honokowai today. If you go out there, you'll see very few turtles with tumors now, but many of them, most of them in fact, used to have tumors. That's true for the larger turtles, but unfortunately for the younger turtles, the story is not so good. In the 10 years that we summarized for our paper about regression, we analyzed 21 juvenile turtles, 21 small turtles. And of those 21 turtles, only one ever regressed. FP in small turtles progresses more quickly and is more devastating, and in fact, most of them don't survive it, at least as far as we can tell. But despite this, the scientists were happy to learn that there really wasn't any extinction threat to the species as a whole. So how does all of this relate to the Book of Honu? Well, in 2001, I had angina and wound up with a double angioplasty. And this was a bit of a scare, and it made us realize that we had better do something to fulfill our promise to Cotton Hum. So we started on the Book of Honu. We wanted to educate people about the Honu and how to interact with them without any harm. And we also wanted to explain how cool the Honu really were. So we prepared our manuscript and submitted it to the University of Hawaii Press, and thanks to a wonderful editor, Keith Lieber, they accepted it, giving us instant prestige and credibility. And it finally made it into print in 2008. It's been selling steadily ever since, thankfully, and is now available from the University of Hawaii Press, of course. You can get it from Amazon, at the local Barnes & Noble, and of course the Maui Ocean Center gift shop, and as Aaron explained to you, you can buy it here tonight. I hope most of you already have it. Now, the Honokowai Honu helped us write the Book of Honu. They're special to us in all the world. I call them an ohana because we needed a collective noun because Hawaiian sea turtles are faithful to their foraging sites, and in fact they're faithful to very small areas, faithful to the same spot quite often on the reef. So we needed a collective noun to describe this, and we decided that, actually George Balas suggested this, that a group with shared experience is another meaning for ohana, and therefore ohana was definitely the best collective noun for the Honu. So even when the numbers were really small, the Honu were known to remain in a small area except when migrating. In fact, we presented a poster on this subject in 2001 at the International Sea Turtle, in the International Sea Turtle Symposium. With one of these titles that sea turtle symposiums seem to like, but the remigration and residency of Hawaiian green turtles in coastal waters of Honokowai, West Maui, Hawaii. And this showed that Tutu, Shredder, Mendelbot, MacTaggart, and Tiamat, over the decade from 1990 to 1999, all migrated to the French Frigate Shoals to nest, and all returned to the same small area, the same reefs at Honokowai, West Maui. So the question you might be asking yourself is, how did we know we were seeing the same turtles over and over? Well, this is Nui. We first met Nui in 1990, and he'll be an example to show you how we did it. Basically, we started recording their profiles. That was inspired by whale IDs, actually, where they were recognizing patterns on flukes, and we said, well, the faces seem to form distinct patterns, so why don't we try recording the patterns on their left and right faces? So it became quickly obvious that this method would work. And here's an example of, this is a profile of Nui from 1992 and another from 1998. And if I fill in the scales on his face with color, it becomes pretty obvious right away that these patterns are identical, and in fact we're seeing the same animal in both pictures. And here's a series of his profiles from 1990 up to 1999. And all it takes is a little study, and you can see that this indeed is the same animal every year. So this convinced George Balaz that we were actually doing what we said we were, documenting the same turtle year after year. So he encouraged us to keep organized records. And we developed a database, and we eventually documented over 750 individuals and their tumors before we stopped in 2005 to concentrate on writing the Book of Honu. So now I'd like you to meet some of the really special Honu from the Honokowai Ohana. Now to us, cloth the hump is the most important, but to the Honu and green turtles worldwide, the most important Honu is Tutu, the grand dam of Honokowai, as we call her. Now when we met Tutu in 1990, she was the largest turtle we'd ever seen. She was the first Honu whose tags we read. She was the first Honu documented to return to exactly the same place after nesting. But she's the most important Honu because of this. This is a very bad video frame grab from the poor equipment that we're using in 1990, but you can see this tumor on the posterior of her right eye. This turns out to be the most important tumor. Why? Because in 1993, and again, you'll have to excuse the quality of the frame grab, but it is good enough that we can identify that this is indeed Tutu, and on her right eye, the tumor has gotten considerably smaller. And in fact, by 1997, the tumor had vanished and was replaced by scar tissue. So this was the first Honu documented to have regression. Sadly, the last time we saw Tutu was in 2005. We believe she's okay. We don't think that she was perfectly healthy the last time we saw her. We think that she's just moved on and she's somewhere else. Now, another important Honu that I'd like you to meet is Hazit. This is Hazit from 1992. And in fact, this video shows Hazit the very first time we ever saw him. He's a very small turtle, and one's unusual because small turtles usually live a lot closer to shore. This is taken perhaps 400, 500 yards out from the shoreline. And Hazit was a really cute, precocious little turtle, very curious, was not intimidated by divers at all. And he just, again, stole our hearts. I'll show you a second clip. This is Hazit from 1995. And this is probably one of the last times we ever saw him. And it shows one of the reasons we found him so fascinating. The bigger turtle is Pilikia. Pilikia wants to settle down on the reef, but Hazit is having none of it. And Hazit is just giving her a hard time. That's just what he did. He was like that. It's a good example of how small turtles aren't intimidated by big turtles, and sometimes they actually will chase a big turtle off. Now, we didn't see Hazit again after 1995, and you can see why from this photo. His plastron is blackened, concave, and even though he has only got a few very small external tumors, it's almost certain that he had internal tumors that were preventing him from getting the nutrition he needed. And so we assumed that after 1995, Hazit was dead. And Hazit for us is the prototypical example of juveniles with FP. Now this is a very odd-looking turtle that we met in 2000. We called her Ho'omalu. Ho'omalu was definitely some kind of green turtle, but also was not a Honu. We suspected that she was a black turtle, or perhaps a cross. And this is the reason. This is the first time we ever saw her. Pacific black turtles are not officially recognized as a separate species, but they have distinct morphological characteristics. They have a much darker carapace. Pacific turtles are speckled. This one is Ho'omalu is speckled. Their carapace is more pointed at the rear. They have a grayish plastron, smaller flippers, and a rounded head. Definitely not a Honu head that we're seeing there. Now, Ho'omalu has several meanings, but our intended sense was to bring under the care and protection of, because we knew that she was not a native Hawaiian turtle, or we didn't think so anyway. But in August of 2000, George Balaz came over and he met Ho'omalu. And in fact, in this video, you can see him performing a rather interesting and unusual scientific first. You can see him reach under the plastron there. And what he's doing is he's plucking barnacles. And the reason he's doing this is that a little bit of skin is retained by the barnacle when he plucks it. And his intention was to have this skin analyzed for DNA to see exactly what the history might be for Ho'omalo. And sure enough, the analysis confirmed that Ho'omalo had a Mexican mother, and possibly, but it wasn't able to confirm this, a Honu father. We saw Ho'omalo for several years, but the last time we saw her was in 2009. Now this turtle, a strange looking turtle, we saw in 2004 for the first time. We called it Y. Y looked like a hawksbill from a distance, and he moved like a hawksbill, but we weren't sure what we were seeing. We suspected that he might be a cross. Y has flippers with strongly delineated patterns, like a hawksbill does. His flippers are smaller than a Honu's, like a hawksbill's. As you can see here, his shell is serrated at the back and imbricated, like a hawksbill. He has the tiny tail of a hawksbill, small hind flippers, like a hawksbill. But he has only got two prefrontal scales between his eyes there, and that's a Honu characteristic. His shell is mostly like a Honu. It's not as elaborate as a hawksbill shell. But the clincher, that this is a cross we were seeing, is this little vestigial claw. Honu have only got one set of claws, one on each flipper, but hawksbills have two. So we call her Y, complete with a question mark, which is Hawaiian for who. And George Balaz also met Y. He came over and he tried the same barnacle sampling technique that he pulled with Ho'omalo, but unfortunately not enough skin was taken for DNA tests. But he's still convinced, and so are we, that we were actually seeing a Honu hawksbill cross, the first known Honu bill, if you will. And amazingly, we first sighted Y at Napili, which is 4 miles north of our normal dive site. But amazingly, we sighted Y at Honokowai in 2005 and again in 2006, but we haven't seen her since. Now, the next turtle I'd like to talk about is 5690. You probably know her. A lot of people from Maui are familiar with 5690 because she nests in Lahaina. 5690 is known perhaps as Maui Girl to You or something like that, but she's unique because she is the only turtle for which we know the age and exact age and origin. And I want to explain here, by the way, that all of the photos and videotape that have made of 5690 are taken during her nesting trance, which is a time when nothing is going to distract her or disturb her. So normally you would not use light around a nesting turtle. Now, 5690 was hatched at Sea Life Park on Oahu from eggs that George Balaz collected at the French frigate Shoals in 1980. And then in 1981, after he'd finished his research, she was released off the Big Island. George attached one tag to her, just one. And it wasn't even firmly attached. He didn't even expect it to stay on. And then nothing for almost 20 years. And then in 2000, he got a phone call from Maui about a nesting turtle in Lahaina with a tag reading 5690. She'd actually come to nest on one of the busiest beaches in Lahaina. It's Kamehameha Iki Park. Kamiki, I guess. Kamiki is where they have whole surf schools, and it gets a lot of traffic in the daytime. Not really a very good choice for a nest, but that's where she went. And she's been doing it consistently pretty much ever since. She returned in 2002, and George Balaz, anticipating this, flew over and made this video.
And there's 5690. Now you can see her tag good. And you can also see why she makes that noise on her flipper, on her shell.
And this is a satellite tag that George came over to attach. We wanted to find out where 5690 was actually spending her time when she wasn't in her nesting. We had no idea. We thought maybe she could be going over to Molokai or who knows. But it turned out that she wasn't going very far at all. Her nesting, her foraging area rather, is up around Kapalua. And in fact, in 2004, when my wife and I were at Napili in a kayak one evening, just around sunset, we heard splashing in the water. And we knew there were Honu over there. We weren't sure what they were up to, and we decided to paddle over and see what was going on. And as we paddled over, I said to her, well, it's probably 5690, as a joke. And when we got there, I was totally astonished, and in fact, that's exactly who it was. 5690 and two male suitors who were trying to mount her, and she wasn't having any of it. And I got extremely lucky, and I managed to get this very clear profile shot that, although we knew who it was, we were pretty sure, this profile shot proved exactly who we were looking at, 5690 in her foraging grounds. So just an amazing coincidence. She nested every second year until 2010, and then she skipped to 2011. She didn't come in 2010, so she went on to a 3-year cycle, and in fact, she didn't come back this year, so she's probably still on a 3-year cycle as opposed to a 2. We expect perhaps she'll be back next year. But George is fascinated by 5690. He has a special attachment for her. He flew over and insisted that when we usually take, during her nesting, we usually take exactly one picture, and only one nesting in the summer. And George insisted that he had to wait until he came over and got in the picture. He wanted to be, he wanted to have a picture of him with 5690 one more time. So I want to emphasize again that we only take one picture, and it's always done in her nesting trance. We don't want to violate the turtle's privacy or scare her back into the water or anything like that. 5690 usually makes 6 or 8 nests in a season on the average, but she puts fewer eggs than most other turtles in there, so the total number of eggs she produces in a nesting season is about the same as an average Honu. We've watched her make several nests, and we've watched several of her nests hatch out. We never ever thought that in the early days that we'd ever get a chance, because all most of the Honu nest at the French Frigate Shoals, which is 800 kilometers to the northwest, and it's a restricted area. You can't go there. Very difficult to go, even if you were allowed. And so we just thought we'd never see, hatchlings. But the fact is, thanks to 5690, we actually got to see them. We've seen them several times now, and we've attended several excavations. As probably most of you know, after a nest is hatched out, they'll do an excavation to count the eggshells and to see what the nesting success was, and also to release any trapped hatchlings. And I'm particularly proud of this little group of hatchlings because these came from a nest that in 2011 that wasn't known until I accidentally found it. 5690's first known nest of 2011 was quite late, and we just assumed she started late. But I was out there looking for her tracks one morning, and I stumbled across a dead hatchling on the surface, sadly. But that little hatchling died a hero because it told me that there was a nest where I was standing, an unknown nest that had just hatched out. It was probably her first nest for 2011. So it was a wonderful story because when they dug it out, trapped underneath the roots were about 17 or 18 little hatchlings that never would have made it out if we hadn't found the nest. So I'm really happy about that. Now, because of these little hatchlings and the hatchlings that 5690 has produced over the years, by the way, somewhere starting probably around 2020 or 2022, somewhere like that, there should be quite a few turtles showing up to nest at Kamehameha Park, and that should be really interesting when it starts to happen. I hope I'll come around to see it. So let me move on now to some of the cool Honu stuff that we document in our book. And this is the first thing that we always try to educate divers. Every diver should know this. This is what we call the alert position. The turtle is up on its flippers, the head is up, he's looking around, very, very wary, and it's preparing to leave. And the reason for this, of course, is that you're probably getting too close. So if you see a turtle assume this position, back off, just let it be, and a lot of the times they will realize that you're not a threat, and they'll settle back down and you can get your picture or just watch it, whatever you like. Unfortunately, sometimes the turtle will leave, and if that happens, well, you learn from the experience and learn how to approach more carefully and not get as close. Now, the next series that I'm going to show you are interpretations of what we think is happening. We can't be sure that we're interpreting them properly, but we're fairly confident. And the first one is this. This is the flipper, or the Honu equivalent, I guess, of flipping the bird. This Honu is displeased, and I'll show you a little video sample. This Honu was swimming by and saw us and decided, I guess, that, well, we didn't belong here, or she didn't like us. So she decided to tell us in no uncertain terms. And you can see the turtle coming over, coming closer. We weren't doing anything. There's no reason for this turtle to be ticked off with us, but apparently she was. So she swims right up to me, expresses her displeasure, makes sure that I know that she's not very happy about all of this, and then very casually she's on her way. But just to make sure that we got the message, she does it one more time. Now, this is a behavior that we interpret as a territorial claim. It's called a yawn. It's not really a yawn, of course. It's more a large gape. And here's a good example of how it comes to be and why we think it's territorial. This is Wana, a turtle that we know, and this is Wana's favorite spot on the reef. You can tell from the amount of crushed coral there. And I'm in the background videotaping. And so Wana is about to occupy her spot. And she sees me and she decides that she's going to announce, this is my spot. I guess back in the day, you know, if Big Bang went on, we would have called her Sheldon. Now, as I said, Wana liked her spot, and turtles, Honokowai turtles, and I think, you know, Honu in general, they prefer specific spots on the reef. They really do. You could often tell exactly which turtle you're looking at from a distance just by the spot it's using on the reef. And because of that, if some other turtle sits in the spot, they like to claim it. And one of the ways they do this is something that we call the headbutt. And here's a great example of a male who's decided that he's going to get rid of the usurper in his spot. So he comes in at a fair clip, puts his head down, and just gets it underneath the carapace. And you can see he's going to make sure that she gets out of the way, because that's my spot. Now, the turtles will do this to humans too. If you could be lying there on the reef, and if you're in a place that the turtle wants, you could easily get headbutted. And another way that they will make a turtle move so they can have their spot is nipping. Here's an example showing Zeus, our alpha male turtle for Honokowai, and this female decides that she wants the spot that Zeus is in. So she swims around to his hind flipper and chomp. But Zeus is not about to give up, so he turns around and she's intimidated, I guess, maybe by his size. That's the end of that one. Now, another behavior you might see out there is mounting. Mounting is probably going to be interpreted as a mating behavior, but in fact, almost every single incident that we've ever seen of mounting, and we've seen quite a few by now, including this one from 2011, the turtle on the bottom is a male. So I don't know why they do this. It could be a dominance thing, or it could be perhaps practice. I don't know. But it's clear that the male on the bottom is not happy about it. The one thing we know for sure is that it's not sexual, because in all of the ones that we've observed, we've never seen a penis make its appearance. Now, another thing that the Honu like to do out there is scratch. A turtle will find a ledge, like Noe has done here at East House in 1998, and just rub its carapace against the ledge. And turtles will do this for quite a long time. We've seen turtles do this for 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a stretch. They just love it. I don't know if they get an itch or if it just feels good, but that's what they do. Here's a good example. Again, we'll show you Zeus. And Zeus has managed to get a good double going. He's scratching on the left side. He's got his carapace rubbing up against the coral head, and then his plastron is rubbing up against the corals underneath him. And you can see that these corals have been pretty much trashed. You can imagine when you get a turtle this size who's scratching like this, that it's not really very good for the corals. The corals usually are going to come out second best. But Zeus is having a good time. And in fact, this is the ledge that Noe was scratching on in 1998, and this is the picture taken from 1999, and you can already see that the ledge has been collapsed. Now, one of the things that we've often wondered about is whether Honu play. Small animals, young animals, like to play, all species. And in fact, we actually think so. This is Makana, a young turtle that we knew for several years, until she was taken with FP. And I have a delightful little clip of Makana playing, I think we could call this playing, by surfing. I was a glider pilot instructor for several years, and there's a kind of lift that we always call wave lift. And wave lift happens when air flows up over a mountain, and the uprising air provides enough lift that you can get your glider in it and fly back and forth and have a great time. Makana obviously understands this principle because, of course, the same thing happens when water flows up over a ridge, over a reef like this. And Makana spends her time just floating in that current, just basically having a great time as far as we could tell. I don't know what else you would call that except play. Now Makana had a little companion out there, Akibono. Akibono was the smallest turtle that we ever saw out there actually, so we call her Akibono. And here's a clip of Makana going in. Akibono is tucked under the reef, and he goes in and tags her. Come on, let's go and play. We're going to go out and play. And so this video, actually, we both videotaped this, and it went on for, a good 5 minutes or so. They just seemed to enjoy chasing each other in circles around on the reef, and perhaps playing tag or just playing chase, I don't know. But the thing was, we got the impression that they were enjoying it, and this was actually their way of playing. And it was quite entertaining and quite fascinating to watch, really. Sadly, the FP got both of these turtles. Now here's another phenomenon that you might see out there. We call it burping. First time we saw this, we thought, oh my God, this turtle is bleeding from the mouth. But in fact, that's not what it is at all. The way that turtles eat their algae is that they will compress it with their tongues at the back of the throat. And I guess if they're eating some kinds of red algae, this will cause this kind of seeping. So this turtle is probably actually quite happy. It's probably just digesting. But it is quite disturbing to see the first time. On the other hand, once you realize that it's not blood, it's actually quite fascinating. And this turtle will go on like this for, I don't know, again, 4 or 5 minutes. Now, when I was looking through the video for tonight, I came across this wonderful little clip that I wanted to show you. I call it Honu versus camera. And it illustrates a couple of the behaviors that I was explaining earlier. Ursula had left her camera in the sand for what reason, I can't really tell you. And this Honu got curious about it, and I guess it wasn't really sure what it was, but it wanted it to move. So the first thing that she tries is the classic headbutt. Of course, the camera isn't going to swim off. Turtle butts it a few times. Now, come on, get out of my way. I want the spot, I guess, or whatever. And then I suppose the turtle decides, well, that doesn't work. I don't know. What can I do next? So I'm just anthropomorphizing here, but I think the turtle probably decided, well, how do I make this thing move? I know. I'll nip it. And so the turtle just starts nibbling away at our camera. Of course, that's not going to work either. The camera's not going anywhere. And eventually the turtle figures this out and decides, oh well, I guess I didn't really want that spot anyway. Now, this, I'm showing this again, I showed this last year, but this is really the most remarkable photographic sequence that I have ever made underwater, simply because of this little guy right here. This is a spotted pufferfish, or a toby. And tobies feed on barnacles, or parasites, I guess, on the turtle's skin. And the turtles find this annoying because the bite must be painful. Quite often when a toby bites, you'll see the turtle flinch. And in fact, if you see a turtle flinch and you can't tell why, it's almost certain that a toby is at work. So I saw this toby approaching and I thought, this is a good opportunity to get a picture of a toby harassing a turtle. So I got this setup photo, and then I decided I would zoom the camera in a little bit, and I looked down, and then when I looked back up, Toby's gone. Okay, well, where did the Toby go? And then I realized, there's the Toby, or at least the tip of his tail. I was completely blown away. Honu are vegetarians. Honu don't eat fish. I had never seen, I don't think anybody has ever seen a Honu chomp down on a fish before. But there it is, there's the evidence. And in fact, this turtle probably realized, oh wait, I'm a vegetarian. I don't like this. And about a moment later, spit out her names, the poor little Toby. So there you go. Nobody was more surprised than me, except perhaps that poor little Toby. And you can bet that that Toby's not going to harass another Honu. So, what's the status of the Honu today? Well, up until 4 and 5 years ago, the Honu spent the day lying around on the reef. This is a 1996 photo, actually, that we took of Nani, surrounded by a cloud of yellow snappers. By the way, we don't see yellow snappers anymore. I don't know where they went. And lying around doesn't really make good video, but then I came across this clip. This is interesting because this turtle has taken what I call the la-di-da position. It's lying there with its flippers tucked underneath the plastron, and it's basically watching the fish go by. But you can see this lying around. It's not really good for the reef. If you look, you can see that the turtles are crushed. And they're crushed because the turtles do things like Juana is doing here, sprawling. Or sometimes they just sprawl across 2 coral heads. Why not? Or even sometimes they just fall asleep on their heads, like Snoozy did. Snoozy was remarkable for falling asleep. I don't think we hardly ever saw Snoozy awake. So we could always tell, actually, when turtles were using a reef, even if they weren't there, because we would see these crushed corals, which we call turtle tramples. This is 4 turtles up on reef, what we call reef 2, and you can see that they pretty much trashed this part of the reef. And in fact, in 2000, we went to the 20th Sea Turtle Symposium and presented a poster called Changing the Landscape, Evidence for Detrimental Impacts to Coral Reefs by Hawaiian Marine Turtles. Yeah. Meanwhile, I just love those titles. But today, daytime foraging is common, and when we go out there, we don't see very many turtles. We used to go out and we would see 20 to 30 turtles. And today, when we go out on a dive, we see maybe 3 or 4 if we're lucky. There's nobody home. And because of that, the reefs at Honokowai are recovering a lot faster than we expected. And in fact, this photo was taken in 2011, and you can see that reef's not doing too badly at all anymore. But if they're not on the reefs, well, where are they? It turns out that they're inshore foraging all day. And they're basking. Now this picture was taken at Maui Ocean Center, where they've been basking for many years, but they are now basking quite commonly at Okipa on Maui, for example, and other places around the islands. And even at the Nohonani, where we stay every year. We used to dive 2 or 3 times a day, actually, to see the Honu, and now they come to us.
That's why I feel kind of silly going out into the ocean, because now you don't have to expend that kind of effort anymore. You come right out on land. And just to show you the site here, the Nohonani, Honokowai. We have a turtle right here in the shallows. And we have another one right here. It's called the Shorter Bask. It is Tuesday, July the 13th, 2013. We have a whole bunch of people here on the beach. And some are even taking photographs up here. And what's the big deal? And the attraction? There's a Honu who's crawled up on the beach. Person getting their photograph with a turtle. They're being respectful, and it's great.
So, what changed? Well, we don't know for sure why this is happening, why they're spending their time inshore foraging. We do know that when we go out there that there's not as much limu as there used to be, so one reason, of course, is that they have to spend the day feeding themselves, where before they could only come in the morning and in the evening to feed. Until about 4 or 5 years ago, 2008, 2009, they were still spending most of their time out on the reef, but now they're inshore. The limu is just not there anymore. Up until then, perhaps eutrophication was causing an abundance of limu. Certainly we documented algae blooms in the early days, especially in the 90s, and we were involved in campaigning for a solution. But again, you have to be careful what you wish for, because if there was no eutrophication, no limu, there's no Honu on the reef during the day. And that's bad for our observations. We dive less frequently because of that. And as I said, it forces the Honu to forage constantly. Results probably in lower growth rates and longer nesting intervals. But it is good for visitor observations from shore, and certainly there's less trashing of the reefs going on now. Now I want to conclude by reading to you the last chapter of our book. It's a short chapter. We call it Of Honu and Foxes. A perfect allegory. The classic story, The Little Prince, contains a beautiful metaphor for the relationship between humans and nature. In the story, the little prince encounters a fox. Feeling unhappy, he asks the fox to play with him. The fox replies that he cannot, for he is not tamed. The little prince is unfamiliar with the concept of taming, so he asks the fox to explain. The fox teaches the little prince that taming means establishing ties that, once created, make the bond unique. He points out that the little prince is just a boy, like 100,000 other boys, and that he is a fox, just like 100,000 other foxes. Then he explains that taming would mean that they need each other. So the fox teaches the little prince how to tame him. They gradually get to know one another from a distance of safety, their own comfort zones. Over time, the two hearts draw a little closer every day. Ever so patiently, they forge a bond of trust. Taming is time-intensive and demands patience. There are no shortcuts. We hope you understand what this concept of taming has to do with the Honu. There could be 100,000 sea turtles in the Pacific that are just like 100,000 other sea turtles in the world. But the ones we dive with have tamed us, and we them. They have names like Papa, Zeus, Tiamat, and Akebono. And some, like Tutu and Nui, we've known since the early 1990s. To us, the turtles at our dive site are unique in all the world. This uniqueness is enormously rewarding. These Honu matter a great deal to us. We have need of them. Taming indeed has its emotional rewards, at least for us humans. Yet taming is truly an awe-inspiring thing. If for no other reason, then taming teaches a wild creature to trust humans. Taming essentially removes some of the wild out of wildlife. Every single day in Hawaii, humans are taming Honu. By not harassing, hurting, or hunting them, residents and visitors alike teach the Honu that they have nothing to fear from close human contact. As we said before, Honu learn from experience. Tour boat operators, dive masters, kayakers, surfers, even tourists have taught Honu that humans are safe. That's quite a lesson to serve up to any wild creature. We leave the last words to a wise fox. When the time comes for the little prince to leave, the fox cries as he shares his simple secret with his new friend. As we have learned from our own experiences underwater with Honu, taming comes with an exacting price. Men have forgotten this truth, said the fox, but you must not forget it. You become responsible forever for what you have tamed. Mahalo for coming.
Anybody have any questions? Okay.
Yes.
I live just down the street in one of the condos here in the harbor, and a Honu came up on our beach a couple of weeks ago that had growths all over her face, his, her
Tumors, yeah.
armpits, and whatever. And I'm just wondering if you can tell the age if this is one that you recognize, or.
Well, it would not be likely one that we recognize because the Honu don't have a range that large usually. The turtle, you can't really tell the turtle's age. Bigger turtles tend to be older turtles, but that also depends on where they grew up. For example, over on the Kona coast where food is not as abundant as it used to be here, the turtles didn't grow as fast. The turtles at Honokowai, where we were, had for many years an abundance of food, and in fact their growth rate was a lot faster than most. But if the turtle is capable of swimming and feeding itself, then the turtle is probably not doing too badly. Did you notice whether it had tumors on the eyes or not?
I have pictures if you want to see.
Well, sure, I'll show the picture. As I mentioned, that we did a study of the eyes of turtles, and if that turtle is probably going to be in good shape. And I'll tell you why. Because you can see her eyes, or his eyes. Can you see the back again? Back in. Yeah, you see, that turtle, in fact, the turtle has had tumors in the eyes and they've regressed. So even though these tumors are huge and ugly, this turtle is probably going to be just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
My son and daughter-in-law were here a couple of weeks before, and the same one, because she took pictures as well, was
Yes,
up on the beach.
that's right.
So,
Yeah, they will come up, they are creatures of habit, they will come to the same spot. They like to go to the same spot. We've got 3 regular pastures at the Tahonani where we're staying, and you can tell where they crawl up on the beach, which one it'll be. In fact, the male only comes out in the daytime. The female comes out at night, and then we have a smaller turtle. It's too small to be sure if it's a male or female yet. He will come up way up at the north end of the beach. Okay, so, yes?
How do you tell if they're male or female?
Well, you can't until they reach sexual maturity.